Hello, and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a political podcast that has full confidence in itself. No, wait, it doesn't. Oh, yes, it does. And I'm joined today by Rob. At least I think that's who's opposite me. Is that you, Rob?
It is. Hi there. How are you?
I'm good, Rob. How are you?
Yeah, very well.
Stressed out on this Christmas Eve?
No. I think I'm fairly chill, actually. I did want to share with you something that I read on Twitter today. Actually, I heard that this day was called Christmas Adam because it always comes before Eve and is ultimately less satisfying. So, yeah, just thought I'd share that with you before we go ahead. So I'm enjoying this Christmas Adam, and yeah, all ready for Christmas as well.
Yeah, no, me too. I did foolishly go down to a supermarket earlier today, and then I had to drive to a separate supermarket 10 miles away because that supermarket was so rammed. Don't go to Tesco on Christmas, Adam. That's not a good idea.
I went on Saturday at 6:30 in the morning, and it was still jammed. So yeah, the best. Just don't go out anywhere at all. Stay inside. Have drones deliver it to you.
Well, we'll get to drones in a minute. So I think we've got a lot to get through. People who heard our last episode know that we kind of released it in a vacuum of knowledge. Or was that the one before? Tries to remember.
No, it was the last one. Yeah.
Yeah. So our last one. Talk about making bad political predictions. We were like, oh yeah, there's going to be a vote, and we're going to make some predictions on the vote. And then May went and withdrew the vote, and everything was up in the air. Everything is different. So there is a lot to talk about on Brexit, as I'm sure doesn't surprise you. We're going to quickly do headline quickfire before that, though. So straight on into headline quickfire. So our first one, I don't have a headline to hand because, unfortunately, as we mentioned before, the Tomorrow's Papers Today only archives UK papers most of the time. Trump wants to build a wall. We've discussed this before, I think, or at least touched on it. And now it looks like there's a GoFundMe campaign with people trying to raise $1 billion to pay for the wall because Congress won't. What are your opinions on this whole crazy story over in the US?
The whole thing's a bit of a farce, really, I think. Trump wants to try and get $5.7 billion for a wall funded through Congress. This was a wall that he originally said Mexico would pay for. So, he's already failed on that part of his promise. He then wanted to tie it to, he goes big on border security and saying that this is vital for the border security. Therefore, I will try and get support from Democrats that he needs support from in the Senate to try and pass a bill of that magnitude, particularly with those sort of financial implications. There was hope that a deal had been reached late on Thursday night, I believe, only for Trump to scupper it at the last minute and say, no, it has to have funding. So the lower house, the House of Representatives, passed a bill that does fund the wall and gives him $5.7 billion. However, the Senate rejected this plan, which was foreseen by nearly everybody, and as a result, the government has gone into shutdown over Christmas. This means essentially that no federal employees will be paid, will have their Christmas paycheck before then, which is making a lot of them understandably quite unhappy. It's also meant that Trump has had to cancel his trip to Mar-a-Lago to celebrate Christmas. I think he's going to have it in the White House now. There was a lovely picture of him very busy at his desk with lots of stacks of paper, signing what appears to be on closer inspection, if you zoom into the picture on Twitter, a blank piece of paper.
The internet does love a blank piece of paper. At least he's not holding it up in front of his face this time.
Yes, exactly. So it's been a rough week for Trump in that respect. He does seem to have lost the support of the Senate, and it's only going to get worse considering that the results of the 2018 election, that intake will come in at the start of 2019. This would be his last chance to get any real border funding through or anything passed in any chamber. So if it fails now, it's going to fail forever. On the side, as you mentioned, he's got this independent GoFundMe campaign to raise $1 billion for the wall, which, I mean, if Congress are asking for $5.7 billion, then it's hardly going to make a dent. I think I saw an image earlier that suggests they've raised $500 million already. Is that correct?
Yes, I was unclear on that point. Let me just go and do some real-time feedback. We the people will fund the wall. So it's hit 16 million, which is a far cry from the Twitter account claiming it was going to be done in
$500 million.
Yeah, half a billion is quite different to 16 million. But as has been pointed out, whoever owns the GoFundMe, the money gets deposited into their account. So, I mean, someone has raised 16 million at the moment. We don't know if they're going to actually give it to the government. And I believe I've heard, and you might be able to correct me on this, I believe that a private citizen can donate as much money as they like to the US government, and it just goes into the general pool for the budget. So it would still require Congress to say, yes, you're going to build a wall, and here's the money for it. So even if someone raised all the money needed for the wall, it would still require Congress to say, yes, we're going to use that money for the wall. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's pretty much correct. And Trump won't be in charge of Congress very soon. So ultimately quite a unlikely campaign. I was going to say pointless, but unlikely goal and fairly pointless. But it does show that at least there is some support. We know that Trump's got a very strong base that sort of supports him through thick and thin, even when, as I mentioned earlier, if he said that Mexico was going to pay for it, it appears to be something that they are willing to pay for themselves if it needs to happen. There was also on a slight tangent. Did you see the picture of the wall that Trump tweeted? Which was
yes, the one that looks like it's looks surprisingly easy to get through. Really,
yes, a slatted fence, I think, which other people called it, and he called it in one of his sort of Twitter videos out to everyone, saying a wall, slatted fence, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be great. All of the usual Trumpisms. So, yeah, ultimately, I think this is a fairly fruitless exercise that will ultimately end in failure. Yeah, not much more to say on that other than that. But yeah, it just adds to Trump's troubles. We always know he's had a big problem passing things through Congress, and this is just a next one in a long line of things he's going to have trouble passing.
So moving back to the UK now, from the Daily Telegraph, with only 100 days until Brexit, MPs stage end of term pantomime.
Yes, this was the big story that happened as a result of PMQs, or Prime Minister's Questions, on Wednesday, where Theresa May gave quite a memorable exchange with Jeremy Corbyn that essentially based it around a pantomime theme. As we alluded to in our joke at the start of the episode, Jeremy Corbyn was umming on ahhing on whether to call a vote of no confidence in the government. Theresa May essentially turned this into an "oh yes he is, oh no he isn't," and then finished off with the big sucker punch of "if you want to know who the real enemy is, look behind you," essentially inferring that he doesn't have the full support of his Labour Party colleagues. I think this leads quite nicely into the next headline you've got, actually.
Yeah, I suppose it does. And our next headline is from the Metro. I didn't call Prime Minister a stupid woman.
This was Jeremy Corbyn's alleged response to that exchange with Theresa May. So the Prime Minister, during Prime Minister's Question Time, always essentially gets to have the last word when she's talking against the leader of the opposition, and she'd finished off with this pantomime riff. The cameras go to Jeremy Corbyn, who is seen on screen, but he's not mic'd up. You can't tell what he's saying, and he appeared to some to mouth the words "stupid woman." This caused quite a ruckus in Parliament. Almost instantly, it's a real show of how social media and how the internet has changed things. I couldn't imagine anything like this happening 10 years ago. This clip was going around on MPs' phones, and they were sharing it as Prime Minister's Question Time was going on, and that prompted sort of unscripted questions from the House to the Speaker to say, do you think it's acceptable that Leader Opposition just called the Prime Minister a stupid woman? This is sexism. Now, this is where it all gets a little bit complicated, because one person's stupid woman is another person's stupid people. I guess what I mean by that is, because Corbyn was not mic'd up, nobody could officially say, tell what he said.
Yeah, it's not gone into the Hansard, and it's people trying to read what he said. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's not like direct at the camera, right? It's so people who can lip read might struggle to get it right even then.
Yeah, it's sort of like the facial feed they use when it's the camera pointed at him when he would usually be at the dispatch boxes. It's there. So Jeremy Corbyn should know better. He should know that he's on camera all the time. So it may have been a little ill-judged by him to say whatever he said. I think it just so happened to be that the camera was on him at the time when he did this utterance. It's kind of the perfect example of, if you are already a Corbyn fan, then he didn't say stupid woman. There's no way he said that. He's always been a supporter of women's rights. blah, blah, blah. And if you're not a supporter, then it's like, oh, this is the final nail in the coffin. I knew Jeremy Corbyn was a horrible person. Blah, 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 blah. It's a really pointless row, in my opinion.
I mean, I think we need to make it clear here that if he had definitely said this and it was proven, we would both agree that is not okay.
Oh yes, yeah,
like,
yeah.
I think the problem here is that it's very much up to interpretation. Unfortunately, like if it was cut and dry one way or the other, then there would be no argument, right? If he had said that, he would have made an apology, presumably, and everyone would be criticizing him rightly for it. And if it was clear that he hadn't said it, then there'd be no issue in the first place.
The problem I have is that the argument has come down to a what did he say, my personal interpretation of it, which is a really bad argument to have. It's just like when you can't prove it or you can't show one way, the argument just goes round and round in circles. And as many people were saying, and as the Daily Telegraph headline hints at, with only 100 days until Brexit, you should be focusing on more important things like the Brexit deal, rather than if the leader of the opposition said a thing that maybe he did say, maybe he didn't. So that's my final word on the story. It is important to know what the leader of the opposition thinks, and ultimately I think he was stupid for being. Maybe I can't call him stupid. I think it was unwise for him to be caught on camera reacting in the way he did. I think he should have just taken it on the chin and not muttered anything. He's probably wishing that he did that now. But it is what it is. But there's, like I said, there's much more pressing things to be worrying about, like the Brexit problem, rather than this he said, she said nonsense.
Yeah. So our next story is a slight break from Brexit. I'm not going to call this a funny story. There are some very funny jokes that have been made around this story, but obviously for the people who got stuck at the airport for 2 days, I imagine it was awful. They've been late to see their families, etc. So it's not here as a funny story, but it's just a break in the news, really. From the Times, Army called in as drones force Gatwick shutdown.
Yeah, this was the news that flights were cancelled on Wednesday morning, I believe it was, and it's been rumbling on into the rest of the week as a drone was apparently spotted above the airfield, and as a result, all air traffic had to be cancelled. One of the more bizarre things about this story is that nobody can appear to find the drone or know who's controlling it, and for it to be shut down for such a long period of time. I think people thought it might have just been there in the morning and then somebody took it away, but it came back, and the police and the army seemed apparently powerless to stop it. The story has moved on a little since then. There were some theories that it might be eco-warriors trying to make a point just before Christmas. I think I even heard things sort of like Russians doing it, or conspiracy theories like that.
Yes, I mean, so as I said, not a funny story in and of itself, but some of the reactions have been hilarious. So I've put it in the chat, and I'll put it in the show notes. There is a meme with the two Russians from earlier in the year who went to see the 123-foot spire in Salisbury, saying Gatwick Airport is amazing. This is why we wanted to fly our drone and get some beautiful pictures. And also police releasing the first picture of the Gatwick drone suspect, which is the penguin from The Wrong Trousers. So yeah, there's been some very funny jokes around this, but obviously it's not fun for anyone who was involved in. I mean, I've been stuck outside and inside airports before. It's not fun for a few hours. It's definitely not fun for 2 days.
Yeah, it cancelled. Like, there were stories of kids' trips to Lapland to see Father Christmas being cancelled, and that's awful. The other minor scandal that's come from it today is lots of papers led with 2 suspects that were arrested on Saturday night that were believed to be in connection with this drone. Today they have been released, except on the front pages of things like the Daily Mail. They've said, like, are these 2 the morons that ruined Christmas? Quite a strong approach, and a lot of information has now been in the public domain about these 2 who ultimately yet are innocent. So a little question there about how our media conducts themselves, and how we should be sort of like following the process of innocent proven guilty, rather than plastering these 2 innocent people's faces all across the papers and accusing them of something they didn't do.
Cool. And then our final headline tonight, which will lead into our main story, from The Guardian: May intensifies warnings over risks of no-deal Brexit. So we've already touched on the fact that a lot has happened. They say a week is a long time in politics. I mean, I think this is the first time I've ever released an episode and it was basically out of date as soon as it hit the hit the feed. So what has happened, Rob? Run us through that timeline.
Well, okay. So in your defence and in our defence, when we recorded the last podcast, I think we stated that if Theresa May withdrew this vote on her Brexit deal, then it would cause a crisis in government. So I think we were at least right in that prediction, so far as it certainly caused a lot of difficulty. So what happened was that on the was it on the Tuesday? I'm trying to remember. I can't remember exactly what day it was, but it was early that week, just after we'd released our podcast. May addressed the House of Commons to tell everyone that the Brexit vote that she'd planned would have to be pulled because she didn't have the votes to pass it, which is what we and a lot of political commentators had known all along. She'd been unable to convince Parliament to change their mind, or enough people on her side to change their mind, and as a result, she would be postponing the vote to an unknown date. This, as a result, made her seem quite weak within the Conservative Party. So as she went off to the EU to negotiate a few concessions to that deal, most notably on this backstop that we've talked about, that was the one that was upsetting the Brexiteers the most. I think she was looking for a guarantee from Europe that that backstop wouldn't be indefinite, that there would be a secure end date. At the same time as that was going on, the backbench Conservatives within her party made the move to force a vote of no confidence in her. Now, to be clear, because we're going to be talking about a lot of votes of no confidence in this little bit, this was a vote of no confidence from within the Conservative Party. So that was the 48 letters that we've talked about in the past, which is enough to trigger a leadership election within the Conservative Party. If Theresa May was to lose, then a leadership election would have to be held. If she wins, then she would be secure for another year. As it was, it all broke quite quickly. I think we knew on the Wednesday morning that a vote was happening and that we'd know the result of that by Wednesday evening. I was certainly glued to the news all day, trying to get a feel for how people would vote. The big figures you were looking out for were people like Liam Fox and Michael Gove and Andrea Leadsom. These are Brexiteers who are still within the cabinet, so they haven't abandoned May entirely, but still certainly wouldn't support May's softer Brexit deal as it is. If they started to abandon her, then I think it really was game over. What we did see was that a lot of them were coming out in support of her quite publicly on Twitter, saying this isn't the time for a leadership election. Although I would say, this is just me being personal, but somebody like Michael Gove coming forward and say, oh yes, I'm definitely voting for you, Theresa. In a game of Secret Hitler, I would say, right, you're the baddie. You're the one who's definitely not voting for me. You're voting in secret to undermine me. So Michael Gove always playing the renegade option there. So anyway, the result of the vote came in. May won by 200 votes to 117. But as a result of that, or one way that one of her bargaining chips she used to get support from within the party was to say that she wouldn't run at the next general election, which is something that I think many members of the Conservative Party were quite fearful of, particularly given her performance in 2017 and how poor it was compared to how
she should have done.
How she should have done at the time. Yeah, the poll lead she had at the time, that maybe put relief on people and made them think, right, she's just going to get her Brexit deal through, then once she's done Brexit, she's off and we can pick a new leader. Looking at the significance of the 200 votes to 17, her supporters said that, well, she got more votes than she did in her last leadership election. One point I'd say about that is it was only one vote more than she had in 2016 amongst her own MPs. And last time that was a vote between her and other MPs. This time it was a vote between her and herself, essentially, or not her, anybody else but. So I don't think it's quite as impressive as they're suggesting. Sorry, the other big pro is that she can't be challenged for a year within the party. So that solidifies her position in that respect. It means that the hard Brexiteers, the Jacob Rees-Moggs, the Boris Johnsons, can't find a legal way to become the prime minister and the leader anytime soon.
I just want to interject here that I don't know if it's one of your favourite pastimes, but if you're watching BBC Parliament or you have it on in the background, it's always fun, or even BBC News 24. It's always fun to follow the little ticker down the bottom. And there was another. It's either sometimes things are mistyped or sometimes it's the auto transcription they use goes wrong. It goes wrong, and they had May wins vote. She can no longer be changed as party leader for a year.
That's far more accurate than they meant it to be. So May wins. She gets put through that hurdle. One big problem you may see from that vote is that there are 117 members of her own party who don't have any confidence in her, or at least 117 that may not support her Brexit deal. So, in terms of her leadership, she's safe, but in terms of her Brexit deal, it's still as dead as a dodo. With this in mind, that's where we turn to our headline earlier, where it says about stepping up. What was it? Sorry. May intensifies warnings over risk of a no-deal Brexit. This is her other negotiating strategy that she's got, at least within her own party, is to scare the Remainers, or the soft Brexiteers within the Conservatives to support her deal, to try and get it through, to say, look, you may not like my deal and it's not perfect, but it's far better than what would happen in no deal. And as a result, the government has started drawing up more concrete plans if a no deal happens. They're really taking it into consideration that it's a thing that could feasibly happen. This includes drawing up a plan to put the army on standby, stockpiling fridges and insulin, other important medicine, stuff like that, essentially to say that, yeah, if no deal happens, this is what it's going to mean. The EU has also started to prepare as well, and I think it's only fair to mention that the EU has made some concessions. So I think I've mentioned in the past that if we had a no-deal Brexit, planes wouldn't be able to fly because they wouldn't have the right to European airspace. The EU has agreed to extend that past Article 50. They've said, whatever happens, even if it's a no deal, we'll temporarily extend that by 6 months, just so the transition isn't a short, sharp cut and, oh my goodness, our planes can't take off. At least they know what's going to happen. So that at least gives us some hope that the EU is looking to do a deal on this, and that no deal may not be as bad, but trust me, it'll still be bad if it happens. If the government is drawing in the army to deal with it, then it's bad. As a no deal gets more likely, the other thing that Theresa May is experiencing is that the angry Conservative voices in Parliament are changing. So when she was trying to get her deal across, the Brexiteers like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson were the ones standing up saying, this is a terrible idea, my plan's much better. Now Theresa May is planning for a no deal. That sort of plays into the hard Brexiteers' hands. So now you've got softer Conservatives or softer Brexiteers like Anna Soubry speaking up in Parliament saying, look, no deal is the worst of all worlds. Nobody voted for no deal. Theresa, you have to go back and get a deal. So we've got a bit of political stalemate here within the Conservative Party, and here endeth the sort of Conservative timeline of events. Is there anything you wanted to add or explain before we move on to the Labour part?
I'm not sure, really. I mean, I think you've given a pretty good summary there. And you've been paying probably closer attention than I have in the last week or so. I've been letting the main headlines come through my bubble, but I've not had as much of a chance the last week to look into everything quite as in depth. So up until the vote, I was very active. I think we both ended up because we both can post from the Facebook account. I think we both posted within about a minute of each other about the vote result, though yours was more in depth. Mine was just the actual result. So yeah, I was very I was watching that up to the minute, but I've not paid so much attention afterward. I've kind of been like, I'm running up to Christmas, and I knew we had this episode, but in all honesty, I was like, oh, I'm going to take a bit of a break from paying attention to this while I wind down with work and stuff. So
you're not a member of Parliament, are you? Because that appears to be there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like
approach as well, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of I knew there was going to be no general election until after Christmas at the very least. So as we found out last time, so I was like, I'm not going to apply myself quite as much to this as I normally do. But I mean, I will be back into following things properly in the new year. But yeah, no, carry on. I feel with Labour.
So I'm moving on to the Labour bit, and just a warning for this part. This is where politics gets really political, and by that I mean games and counter games and what do I think my opponent will do least. It's lots of gamesmanship in this part. So to just jump into it, Theresa May at PMQs, not this week but the week before, refused to say when a vote would happen on her Brexit deal again. Corbyn was sort of saying, like, is it going to happen before Christmas? Is it going to happen after Christmas? And Theresa May wasn't saying anything. So Corbyn, as a reaction, decides to say that he'll force a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. So vote of no confidence sounds serious. It's the type of thing I think that they mentioned in Star Wars Episode 1, so you know it's big. But the vote of no confidence in the PM is a largely symbolic vote. That if Theresa May lost, it would not force her to legally stand down. Essentially, it would be very embarrassing for her and suggest that the majority of Parliament doesn't have faith in her. But I think we already knew that from the results of her no confidence vote within the Conservative Party. We know that 117 of her MPs don't like her, and by that fact, probably most of the other parties within the House of Commons don't want her to be Prime Minister afterwards. But that's not enough to force a change of government.
Sorry, just one thing I want to mention at this point. So I feel I was slightly confused after this happened. So as we know, as you said, the Conservative Party with 48 letters can call a vote of no confidence in their leader and force that we had. And if their leader wins, their leader stays. And also by seeing that vote, we get a rough idea of how many MPs in the Conservative Party support the current leader. So with that, as we say, about a third don't like her. That's not particularly surprising, given, like you can portion things up into like very Remainer, like the more Remainer MPs who might not like her, and then the very Leave MPs who we can kind of mentally work that out. And then there's a vote of no confidence that can be called in Parliament. But then, am I correct in thinking that Corbyn can also put forward a vote of no confidence in Theresa May again? Like, are there two votes of no confidence that can come from the floor of the House of Commons? Or is that not the case?
Yeah, there are two votes. And so Corbyn's decided to do a vote of no confidence in Theresa May herself rather than a vote of no confidence in the government, which means the cabinet that is running the country.
Right, yeah.
Okay. So because Jeremy Corbyn chose to do a vote of no confidence in Theresa May herself, this is something where the government, so Theresa May and her cabinet, their job is to organise when certain bits of legislation or when certain proposals can be discussed on the floor in the House of Commons and voted on. So the government says, yeah, sure, you can have a vote of no confidence in Theresa May herself, but we're probably going to schedule this until after Christmas. Jeremy Corbyn, as a result, says, whoa, I find that unacceptable. If you don't schedule the vote that I want in Theresa May before Christmas, then I will call a vote of no confidence in the government.
Yes. Yeah.
If he did that, then that's a much more serious bit of legislation. That would be one that would have to be acted on within a week. And that would mean we would have a vote of no confidence in the government before Christmas.
Right, I see. So just to make these clear again, so we've already had an internal vote of no confidence in Theresa May. What is the so I think fundamentally we figure that a vote of no confidence in the government probably wouldn't pass, because one would assume even the backbench Tory MPs wouldn't vote against their own party in such a vote. And since they have a majority with the DUP and they have their deal, they would probably survive a vote of no confidence in the government itself. But maybe Theresa May, considering only a third of her party likes her, and one would assume that Labour's going to vote against her, might lose that leadership vote if it's tabled at the House of Commons. What happens if she gets kicked out that way? What happens? Because obviously, if the government gets deposed via a vote of no confidence, Jeremy Corbyn goes to the Queen, right, and goes, I believe I can form a government. And then there's a whole, can he actually form a government? And then it falls back to a general election if he can't. But I don't think I'm clear on what the process is if Theresa May is kicked out as Prime Minister via a House of Commons vote of no confidence.
Well, the whole point is that she can't be kicked out by that vote of no confidence in just her.
I see. Okay, so it's entirely symbolic.
it's entirely symbolic. It just becomes embarrassing for her. And the idea in that would be to sort of shame her into resigning, I guess, saying, look, you don't have, even if your party will, the party believes in the Conservatives as a whole, they certainly don't believe in you as a leader. And the reason that they would target Theresa May so directly is because this Brexit deal is very much Theresa May's deal. We've already discussed how it's quite unpopular within her own cabinet. She's had to jump through lots of hoops even to get it to this stage. If you think of the 2 Brexit secretaries she's lost along the way, the deal she's had to do at Chequers, we already know that it's her deal. It's certainly not any Brexiteers' deal. It's certainly not any soft Brexiteers' deal. So that might be a way of Labour unsettling the government, but there would be no legal force. There would be no constitutional framework that would force Theresa May out of government, even if she lost the vote that Jeremy Corbyn was initially proposing.
Okay, right. That makes sense now. I think that was the thing I was unclear on, because I managed to get them confused in my head. So yeah, okay, fair enough.
Trust me, as somebody who studied politics for years and years, it was very confusing for me. It must be really hard for the general public to follow. And yeah, when I said it was going to get super sort of like political, that's Jeremy Corbyn forcing a vote that he knows doesn't have any effect. But in doing so, he's saying, if I don't get that vote that has no effect, I'll do the vote that really has a constitutional effect and really do it. So it's all a bit of mind games from the Labour side. The reason why this ultimately failed. We haven't had a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister before Christmas either, and we certainly haven't had one in the government. So the reason why this failed is within hours of Jeremy Corbyn declaring that he might do a vote of no confidence in the government, the DUP, who you mentioned as still supporting the Conservatives, came along and said, we would support Theresa May in this vote. Even though we don't agree with her Brexit deal, we wouldn't want to undermine her, and we only think that undermining her would lead to a Labour government. Equally, the European Research Group, which is the Jacob Rees-Mogg clique, they came out and said, no, we'll support Theresa May too, even though we obviously voted against her in our own party election. This only serves to further Labour's cause.
Yeah, so essentially what I'd surmised that the Conservatives will band together if it's against Labour. Like, they're happy to infight, even if it's like going to screw things over. But also, I suppose they've had that vote. They know they don't have enough. They've shown Theresa May that there are enough people who don't agree with her within her own party, which she knew already, but now she has the number. But also, they lost the vote, so they know that having another vote wouldn't necessarily be helpful at all.
Yes. So the upshot of this is that you have a sort of like a deadlock in Parliament now until afterwards, until the Brexit vote goes ahead on January 15th. We don't know which way Parliament's going to move. Parliament appears to have a Prime Minister that's not fully supported by her own party, a leader of the opposition who is unable to force the government out of government any way possible, and a Brexit deal that we still know that is relatively unchanged from Theresa May's negotiations with the EU when she went away to try and get something from them. She got very little, if anything. The deal's still dead. It's not going to go through, but I don't think it will lead to the fall of the Conservative government either. So I always try and end these things on a cheery note. So at least there's no more political debate until the start of January. So enjoy your Christmas and New Year.
Hooray!
Yeah, I don't know what your opinion is. Like you said, you turned off, or sort of like, as soon as Theresa May won that no confidence vote, that it was getting a bit dense, or this is probably going to sort itself out after Christmas. Have you got anything to add about those sort of like little Labour power plays, or anything you want explained about what's gone on there?
I mean, I think my main thing was that the difference between those two no confidence votes. Because so my layman's understanding was essentially that the only thing that mattered was a vote of no confidence in the government, and I didn't think that could go through based on the numbers. So my assumption was correct, but I didn't know the intricacies of that deal. I didn't know the intricacies of how those two votes related, considering, because it would seem slightly crazy that she could win her own vote within her own party, then lose a vote in the House of Commons, and therefore be kicked out as leader. And it seems that is not the case. So that's fair. Okay. I mean, as I say, I've been paying a little attention. I've not been paying as much attention as I normally would. I think it kind of got to like, I'm interested, but I kind of got to the point where I was like, we said before, it's kind of nice having this 2-week view of the news. And I feel like I decided, lead up to Christmas, I've got more important personal things to worry about. Presents, changing jobs, which I think I can say now. You knew about that, I believe, but I'm changing jobs. So
oh yeah,
like,
congratulations, by the way. Yeah,
tomorrow is my last day because technically I end at the end of the month, but it's just holiday from now on, so that's good. So yes, I mean, I've just been concentrating on stuff like that. I've not paid as much attention as I normally would, and I think I've probably been busy with things that aren't quite politics related. So I haven't really got much to add, I suppose. And I mean, I think maybe since I know what your next topic is, maybe I should probably give like my summary of what, like, kind of my feelings, I suppose, here on the two major parties, kind of after you've said that. So I feel like the Tories have done what the Tories always do. If you see what I mean, like I feel Theresa May has, for however much I may disagree with her politics and her policies and things previously and now, I think she has done the best she can. And similar to what I said when we talked about the deal itself, she has really tried to try and do a deal that doesn't get us to leave, but also doesn't completely screw over the country. And there's now all this political infighting going on, which doesn't make me happy. And I'm still surprised. I mean, we'll see the polls later on, but I'm still surprised by how little effect this is having on the Conservatives, considering they seem like they're ripping each other apart to no end, and it somehow seems to be playing okay. Labour, on the other hand, I really feel like they're not making enough. I mean, especially with PMQs. I know Corbyn has been repeatedly criticised over his PMQ approach, and I think there is a benefit to some of the stuff he's doing, like changing the narrative so that there are some questions like from constituents and stuff like that. I think is quite good, as long as he also asks the big hitting questions when there's an opportunity. And I feel like there's just been a lot of missed opportunities from Labour. And I think this might tie into what we've been seeing the last few weeks, where we keep being like, how are Labour not climbing up in the vote compared to the Conservatives? They're sat there in opposition and everything's going wrong for the Conservatives. And it doesn't seem to be happening. And I think it's because they're too slow to move, or they don't have the will to move when there are problems. If you'd asked me a year ago what my opinion on Corbyn was in these situations, I've generally been quite like happy with what he was doing. Maybe, he could be a bit more attacky. But now when stuff is really hitting the fan, I feel he should be stepping up more and going at the government more. And the vote of no confidence is fine and all, but it's, as you say, it's symbolic. It's not it doesn't really mean anything. It's not achieving anything. And he has missed quite a lot of opportunities to kind of like put the knife in, as it were, and sigh, like audible sigh. The state of politics right now. And it's like, it's so hard to choose, but like there are reasons why I don't vote Conservative personally, but there are like, it's hard to be like one party is being better because Brexit has taken over the whole conversation. It's not like we're here sitting regularly talking about like that thing where he brought up the UN report on the UK.
Yeah,
like, stuff like that.
Poverty, wasn't it?
Yeah, the poverty thing. Like that's great. Like that is a serious problem, and that's the kind of thing Labour should focus on. But Brexit has so taken over the conversation that he needs to kind of put in the jibes about Brexit here and then, and also worry about those things. But because Brexit takes over the conversation so much right now, like I feel like other issues are being pushed to the side, which is a problem because they're very serious issues, things like poverty, homelessness. But I think like people are sat in their bases. There was an interesting article that I'll see if I can find talking about how you have this kind of the kind of general split between like Conservative policies and Labour policies. Like Conservative policies are kind of from a theoretical point of view where they say, here's a policy and the policy is correct. And then you say, but if you enact that policy, people will die. And they go, oh, but the policy is correct because it's a policy without consequences. The only thing that matters is that the policy is well written. And then Labour is much more, or the kind of left wing in general, the liberal idea is about the consequences. Well, if we do this thing, do lots of people die who shouldn't die? I mean, I appreciate I'm going ad absurdum where, people don't always die from any policy in government, but sometimes they do. So it is important. And I feel like that's the problem we have right now is like people have separated based on into these kind of camps. Like we're very polarized and it seems like nothing matters right now, that there is a slight lean to the right overall in the country. based on the percentages, and it's just staying there and nothing's happening. And we're getting closer and closer to Brexit, and nothing's happening on that. And it just seems like we're stuck here. There's a lot of furor, a lot of people going around, shouting at each other. There's a lot of noise, but realistically, what has changed in the last, other than a deal being tabled, like that was a big thing. But other than that, it seems like nothing has really changed, and we're just getting closer and closer to this no deal cliff edge. That I don't think is going to be fun for anyone, as I've said before.
Yeah.
So
it's a real. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, that's kind of a rambling walk through my feelings. It's not necessarily, it's not always backed up with numbers. It's just like right now I'm frustrated with the state of politics, and I imagine a lot of people are. But I feel you might have more specific points. So I think you're moving on to do your report card for 2018, like a teacher.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to summarize 2018 and where we've gone. I think you summing up saying that we've gone nowhere in a year, or relatively, nowhere very quick in a year, and that we're still having the same conversations a year on, is a good summary of where the parties are at. I've tried to draw a few conclusions from each party to where they've sort of moved on definitively, and what I can sort of say with confidence about how they've performed in 2018. So, for example, Theresa May, I think it's an indisputable fact that she is weaker now than when she began the year. She's got a Brexit deal with her name on that is not going to pass Parliament in its current state. She's not going to be a future leader of the Conservative Party by saying that she won't stand at the next general election. She's effectively fired the gun on the next Conservative leader being picked. We've seen in party leaders in the past when this has happened, like Blair. There was the Curry House meeting in 2006 where Gordon Brown and a few advisors got together and said, right, Gordon Brown should be the next leader. Tony Blair needs to step down within the next year. It happened. Tony Blair was gone by 2007 and Brown was in. Even if there doesn't seem to be a front-running candidate, the conversations are already going on behind closed doors about who will be the next leader there. And, we mentioned it before about how, divisive it is within her own party. She's the leader of certainly a divided party, and I would argue that they are more divided than Labour is when it comes to Brexit, of where they are. At least that's a lot more vocal. So that's all of the sort of cons for Theresa May, and what I think I can definitively say is she's had a bad year. The few pros I've picked out is that, well, one, she survived all of it. I feel that was unlikely, or at certain stages I felt that she really was going to be knifed in the back and one of the hard Brexiteers would rise up. But we've yet to see that come through. And in her surviving, that's made her enemies weaker. I think people like Jacob Rees-Mogg have also ended this year weaker than when they began. People were talking about him as a serious leadership candidate. Now, I think, after he would be seen as one of the major ringleaders of those 48 letters to try and remove Theresa May. Now he's failed. He's got a bit of egg on his face, really. And, that seems to have been a misjudged and mistimed manoeuvre that certainly got a lot of ire from those within the Conservative Party. And if you want to win the nominee, be one of the final two nominees in that Conservative Party leadership election, you need the support of a grand number of MPs. And I don't think he'll have that. So at least May is safe for the time being. She's also the only person who's been able to come up with, well, what I've defined as a workable suggestion for Brexit. I know that was her job, and the deal has been widely criticised, but it is a deal, and I think it's one that we were worried wasn't going to come together by December. We had conversations in earlier podcasts about, these no deal. Sorry, these dealings with the EU are really going along a lot very slowly. There doesn't seem to be an answer to this Northern Ireland problem. If they can't come up with that, then we're never going to be able to do a deal. She's come up with a solution to that. So that's my report on Theresa May. Ultimately weaker, but hanging on by a thread. I'd just like to quickly move to the Labour Party. And Jeremy Corbyn in particular. I'm taking quite a leader centrist, like a leader central point of view on these things. So I think if you'd asked me at the start of November if it had been a good year for Corbyn, I would say in general, yes. In this year, Jeremy Corbyn has been able to put his stamp on the Labour Party. He won a lot of important internal elections that put momentum-friendly candidates on boards, which guide Labour policies on big issues. So that means that Corbyn has more power now to put the Labour Party in the direction he wants. There's less infighting amongst MPs. There still is some element of that, but they seem to have united behind Corbyn for the time being, and that was reflected in the local council elections. We mentioned that Labour didn't do as well as they could have done, but they did gain seats. They're certainly the party with the momentum and seem like the natural party of government to succeed the Conservatives if they were to fail. And I think that was summed up by quite a strong performance at the party conference, where a lot of his economic ideas, the social side of Labour, things that before the 2017 general election may have been considered as unelectable or too left-wing for the public to agree with, they're the type of things that seem to be polling well with the public, who want a different approach to the economy, who may have been fed up with the austerity measures that have been in place for the past 10 years.
The arrow swings back and forth, right, between the two parties in general in the UK, and like the corollary for where we are now is kind of end of Thatcher, pre-Major, and that's not just because Theresa May is the current prime minister. I mean, like we've been there for 10 years with the Conservative government, even though it was initially a coalition, and eventually that'll swing back because we had, how long did we have Labour for before that? Was it 12?
Yeah, from 13, from 97 to 2010.
Okay, yeah. So we had 13 years of Labour, and we're now 10 years into the Conservatives. So it's probably not surprising that everything is starting to swing towards Labour again. But I feel like we're in this weird place where it's not quite swung that way. And I mean, I was not alive during the late. Well, I mean, I was alive during the very late 80s, but definitely not able to understand what was going on. And like, I'm just trying to think. I kind of was aware John Major was prime minister as a kid. Like I knew what he looked like and things like that. But it did take a while after Thatcher had gone down for Major to lose. I mean, partly because the general election happened in its normal place, right? It wasn't rushed. It wasn't an early one.
Yeah, it happened as late as possible. The government, like the Conservatives, knew they were likely to lose the next general election, so held on to power for the full 5 years, for the full term before they had to have a general election. So yeah, that's why it was particularly.
I feel that's kind of the position we're in now. Like Theresa May didn't do as well out of the election that she held in 2017, but that means with the Fixed Term Parliament Act and presumably no will from the Conservatives to lose power, that's 2022 when we actually next get to have a general election, and that's 4 years away. So it feels like, I mean, imagine what it felt like in 1993. You know, that's post Thatcher going, right? That's we've had Go Now from Spitting Image, and Major's there, and he has this kind of. It was a bit of we discussed it in one of our silly season episodes, like a summary of British politics. That it was kind of like, you know, he was in a similar position. He wasn't a hung parliament, but he didn't really have the power to push anything through. And yeah, like. I feel we're very much in that position now. We've got 4 years of this, and I would imagine that the next general election will flip to Labour, just because eventually, you know, I feel like Brexit. You know, everyone's going to be annoyed at Brexit, whatever happens, as we've said before. Pretty much no one will be happy. So I feel that's another reason the Conservatives would lose support. But it remains to be seen what we think of Corbyn in 4 years.
Yeah, which is the way that Corbyn has reacted in the past month has maybe brought up the biggest flaw in his leadership, which is Brexit. So you were mentioning how the conversation is dominated by Brexit, and Jeremy Corbyn will bring up in Prime Minister's questions stuff like the UN poverty report. I'd say a reason for that, the reason he does that is because he's really strong on those points. If you want Jeremy Corbyn to argue about poverty and how horrible it is and how the Conservatives have done a bad job of increasing poverty in the country, then that's his bread and butter. He should be winning those arguments and often does. But when the argument turns to Brexit, he's seen as quite weak on that. And that's for a couple of reasons. I think one is he has to balance the views of of the voters in northern constituencies who voted for Brexit, who he wants to keep on side. But that's balanced by a huge amount of members from within the Labour Party who don't want him to support Brexit and actually support a second people's vote, which means I think there was a Guardian article that came out this weekend that said Jeremy Corbyn, I would still go ahead with Brexit if I became Prime Minister next year. And that caused a lot of outrage from people within Labour and Labour activists who said, whoa, 85% of us, polling has proven that 85% of us don't want Brexit to go ahead. Jeremy Corbyn is seen as the leader that listens to his own party and is strong on listening to them and having democracy and putting forward what the members actually want. That was part of his leadership campaign. It's what he thought was denied to members during the new Labour years. So to ignore them on an issue as big as Brexit makes it really tough for some to support him. And that's where it falls down. And I think that's why when we go and see the polls, and you've been talking about why is the government split into these two tribes, or why is the country split into these two tribes? It's because you've got two leaders who are sort of non-budging on the Brexit issue. There's no alternative there when we know 48% of the country wanted a different outcome when it came to that. It's bizarre. I think a Labour, when you were making comparisons between Major and Thatcher, what happened with John Major is that he won the election in 1992, an election that everybody thought Neil Kinnock would win. And when Neil Kinnock lost that election, that forced the Labour Party to rethink its entire direction and spawned New Labour. And New Labour were then ahead of the polls way before 1997. They were up there defeating the Conservatives. It was a foregone conclusion that Labour were going to win the 1997 election. I think if we had an election now, that we'd probably end up with a hung parliament, or very close to that.
Yeah, the arrow would have moved slightly.
Yes, but not enough for Jeremy Corbyn. And Corbyn had a great result in 2017. I think he proved that the left-wing policies that people previously thought were unelectable, no, there is a platform for that. But I think maybe if you had those policies in the hands of another Labour leader who was maybe a lot softer on Brexit, or maybe didn't support it at all, and maybe didn't have some of the other baggage that Corbyn brings with him. I've mentioned in my cons about the Labour Party is that they've still had the anti-Semitic scandal this year tied to them. They've been unable to shake that, and that seems to have come with Jeremy Corbyn, rightly or wrongly. It appears attached to his leadership and only really has surfaced since he's been leader. If you had an alternative person in there who could shake that, then again, I think Jeremy Corbyn's changed the Labour Party so much that the left-wing economic policies, you could have a new leader who brought in those ideas, but just didn't have the rest of that stuff Corbyn brings.
So to summarise, you feel like Labour could win, but not necessarily with Corbyn at the helm. With that sort of the same platform, but not necessarily Corbyn due to various problems, either with his leadership or with how he's handled certain things within the party, and also this kind of perception that's been built up, whether rightly or wrongly, in the media about his views on women and on Jewish people. So that there's a lot of baggage there now, and he's not the person he was 2-3 years ago when people were trying to go against him because he was a bit populist, but not for any particular criticism necessarily. And now it feels like the criticisms, that there's definitely some foundation to those criticisms because he's been there long enough.
Yeah, you're right there. It's entirely flipped, hasn't it? The view of Corbyn. I mean, you have people sort of I think he was unfairly criticised to begin with, and because he was unfairly criticised, that now that hardened some people's support for him. So now, when I feel he's being legitimately criticised about issues that are in his control, and given the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the Labour Party is now his in terms of the policy direction, in terms of who's on the internal boards, nobody can point their finger and say this is a Blairite plot within the Labour Party. The Labour Party's his. He's got nobody to blame now, so it's got to be on him. So now we've got these legitimate criticisms. Some people are defending him nevertheless, and I feel that defence is maybe unhelpful and unhealthy in a way. You need to have those debates to help the Labour Party grow if they're going to have a chance of challenging the Conservatives at the next election.
Yeah. So just while we're on that point, question, wild prediction. So we've lost Corbyn for whatever reason. You've suggested some that might lead to him not being the perfect candidate for going into a general election. Is there someone within the Corbyn part of the Labour Party that's currently in charge that you could see stepping up to the plate?
Oh gosh, I think Keir Starmer stands a chance. He's the Brexit.
Oh yeah, he's been very good with because he's previously a lawyer. He's done a load of Brexit related legal stuff as well, hasn't he? So people know him from that. Yeah.
Yep. I think Sadiq Khan, even though he's not an MP at the moment, but
But
Mayor
he could
of London,
be, yeah.
yes, they could turn him into a position. I think he's certainly been popular within that role. And I was reading the other day that early polling suggests that he's likely to win the mayoral election that happens in 2019 by a landslide against current polling against the Conservative candidate. So he would certainly appeal to the metropolitan areas, same areas that Jeremy Corbyn does, but would be a bit softer. I think a lot of people have mentioned Yvette Cooper as well. I think she stood in the last leadership election, though I'm not. Who's the other one who stood in the leadership election? Who's now mayor of Manchester?
Oh, Andy Byrne.
Andy Burnham. Yeah, not the biggest JC person, but certainly on the left wing of the Conservative. Oh, sorry, on the left wing of the Labour Party, and maybe a candidate. You saying among the Corbyn wing, the problem with that is it's quite small, that bit, or was a very small faction of the party. I don't think John McDonnell would be a natural leader, and Diane Abbott has failed in leadership contests in the past as well.
Sorry, you mean and Diane Abbott?
Diane Abbott, yes.
The only way she's allowed to be introduced, if you follow Dead Ringers.
Yeah, she has a bit of baggage with her as well. Again, a bit like Corbyn, like rightly or wrongly, she appears to be quite a controversial figure. I don't think she would be the person to lead them to a victory. But one of those more central candidates, I think Keir Starmer's probably my best bet for somebody who hasn't been part of government at all, wasn't really part of New Labour, fresh face, but the people know who he is, might be the person to take Labour forward. But you'd almost certainly have to do it with Corbyn's blessing. I think if you want to bring the Corbyn hardliners along, it needs to be a bloodless transition. It needs to be blessed by Jeremy rather than him being overthrown. Because if he's overthrown from within, then it could
lead to the same problems, Labour ripping themselves apart.
Yes.
Yeah. And now we'll go on into our quick polls update before Christmas. So I've had a look at the polls. Have you had a look at them yet?
Yes, I've had a quick look. They're up in front of me now.
So I think so. There's the overall poll summary. Currently, Labour ahead by 1%. Oh no, less than 1%. Labour ahead by 0.5% over the Conservatives. Lib Dems about where they were. UKIP slight dip. Greens slightly up. Again, never quite sure what's going on in the relationship between those three parties because I don't think it's as clear cut as them swapping between. But if we actually go and have a look at the when did we last record? It must have been around the 11th. So Labour +3, Labour +1, Conservative +4, Conservative +3, and then a tie. So looking actually at those results there, it doesn't seem like much has changed again.
No.
With the last one being 39, 39, 6, 6, 4. Yeah.
You would think, or at least your common sense would dictate, that a Conservative Party ripping itself apart would be the time the general public started to lose faith in Theresa May.
Yeah.
And her party. However, those two YouGov, the 14th of December and the 15th of December, may have been taken the day after the vote or very, very near to it, suggests that Theresa May winning that vote actually solidified those people in the Conservative Party, that their confidence. The reason for that might be that there's now a little bit of, there's no uncertainty.
Yes.
Now,
yeah.
She can't be challenged for a year. They know that that's her leader. Okay, right, we'll back her now. And I think historically, I read an article that said that we shouldn't be surprised by those bumps because historically, leaders who have survived no confidence votes get a boost to their figures, even if it was quite a close vote. If they win, then they get a boost. So that might be why. But we've said before, I keep saying it again, we'd always expect Labour to be closer and to have those Conservative +4, Conservative +3 results mid-December, when on the face of it, the Conservatives appeared at their weakest, must be a bit of a body blow to Labour Party supporters.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have anything to add. We've already touched on the fact that it's Labour should be further ahead than they are. And we've been consistently saying that. I mean, if you look at the graph since basically late 2017 or mid 2017, when Labour was ahead, and we had that general election. Since then, they've just slowly lost, and Conservatives have gained, and now they're just kind of flipping back and forth. And yeah, if we had a vote today, hung Parliament, fun. Those are great, aren't they? Nothing gets done. Yeah. So yeah, a slightly depressing poll update for you, in that it's not really changed. But in 2 days' time, you can have a glass of sherry in hand as you're preparing your Christmas feast, and you can not worry about politics for a few days.
Yeah,
wouldn't that be nice? A Christmas present from us to you is not worrying about Brexit.
Yay! just for one day. Just for one day. Just put it to one side.
Excellent. In that case, I think we're going to wrap up then. So thank you as always, Rob, for joining me and helping fill me in on the stuff I'm not so au fait with in the world of politics. As always, you can find us on our website at parliamentary.observer. You can find us on Reddit at /r/unparliamentary. You can find us on Facebook as Unparliamentary Language. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Unparl Podcast. And this is a production of TTSS Productions, which is basically me in my bedroom. But the reason I bring that up is an announcement that we have a new podcast in the podcast network now. And this is the first podcast that's actually not directly involving me. So I'm going to plug it here for the benefit of people doing the hard work over there. So it's run by Brad, a friend of ours. I'm not sure what the crossover is with politics nerds and Warhammer nerds, but Brad and his friends are discussing all the news from the world of Games Workshop and Warhammer 40k in the new Astracast. I know they've got a few episodes in the pipeline, so those will be slowly dropping over the next few weeks. And yeah, go over there and have a listen if that's something you're interested in. I'm definitely going to be giving it a listen. Everything's rolled out now, so it's on it's on Spotify, it's on iTunes, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts. And on the topic of Apple Podcasts, if Apple Podcasts is the famous one, but whatever app you're using, if it has a way to rate and share this podcast, just take a few minutes to, give us 5 stars, say why you like us. Also submit things you don't like. We're happy to hear feedback. It's nice having people join us in the chat. You can join us on Discord. There's a link in the podcast description. Come here and tell us when we're getting stuff wrong live in the chat. That's always fun and useful for us. And also it's nice to have your opinions. Sometimes we get really good questions from people when they're in the chat. So come along and join us for the next recording. And with that, I think it's goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from him.
Bye.
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 I'm happy to push that off till later, actually, though.
Okay.
Let me just move that to the end.
Yeah, cool.
There we go. Solved. Look at that. Movie magic. No one will ever know.